Shadow work is one of the most important tools that we have for personal growth, for just making your life better in general. And if you're on this path of healing and awakening, shadow work is absolutely essential. So my name is David. I help people heal and awaken. And in this video, I'm going to sort of give you an introduction to shadow work, how we can use shadow work for healing and awakening, and also give you a couple exercises that you guys can use that have been helpful in my life. So first, to understand what shadow work really is, we have to understand what the shadow is. So the shadow is basically all of the icky, scary parts of our mind that we don't care to look at or investigate. So these are the things that we experience that kind of in the back of our mind, we're just like, yeah, I don't want to deal with that. So we deny it, we repress it, and we're all around sort of afraid of it and afraid of what it might mean. Our shadow often shows up in the form of hatred as well. That's a form of denial. So our shadow not only exists in our mind, but it exists in multiple dimensions. So what I mean by that is there's a mental shadow. There's also an emotional shadow, a physical shadow, and what I call the external shadow. So we'll get to that in a second. But the mental shadow, here's how that exists. The mental shadow is basically beliefs in your mind. So a lot of times these take the form of negative core beliefs. So things like I am not good enough, or I am not worthy, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not good looking enough. Some of these like negative core beliefs can be part of our shadow. And a lot of time we tend to kind of ignore them or pretend like they're not there. But we still have these beliefs that are creating these thoughts that are flooding our brains every single day. So that's the mental part of our shadow, but it also exists in our emotional bodies. So notice that thoughts don't exist independent of emotions. When we have these thought patterns, we also create emotional patterns with it. So when you're constantly doubting yourself and thinking about how much you hate yourself, you're going to feel that feeling of self-hate, and it's going to create this pattern. So that's the emotional part of our shadow. So there's also the physical part of our shadow. So when we have these emotional patterns come up over and over and over again, they actually start to manifest physically. So one example of this from my childhood is I used to have tics, which are like involuntary movements. And some of the biggest tics I had were moving my jaw, and I would just do that over and over again. And the other one with my wrist, I would just push back in my wrist. And I did these over and over again, day after day for literally months. And I would just be in like severe pain, just agony. And so that's a very clear example of emotional, because what I discovered is that these tics weren't just random. There's so much tension stored in my body that were related to mental and emotional issues, things that I was suppressing, things that I was afraid of as a child. And so this is a very clear example of an emotional pattern manifesting physically. But it goes far beyond this. If you look into diseases, what you'll discover is that most diseases are actually psychosomatic. Most diseases start in the mind. It's dis-ease of the mind creates disease in the body. So the final level to your shadow is the external. So I like to think of the external as sort of the way that we judge the world and the way we act. So it's important to understand here that notice that all of these things I'm talking about, the physical shadow, the emotional shadow, the mental shadow, all of these things are one. There's actually no separation. We're only creating that separation in our mind, but they're actually one unit. They're one. You can think of this collection of a thought and the emotion that comes with it and the physical manifestation of that, and our external judgments. You can think of that as sort of like one ball of energy, if you will, sort of one unit impacting us. And we can come at this ball of energy, if you will, from any of these angles. So we can start to explore it from the mental or the physical. So we can do this by starting on the mental level, by journaling about our beliefs. So this is a process of self-discovery. This is about discovering what you actually believe. So beliefs you hold in your mind create your reality. This is one of the most important investigations you can ever do. Even more important than doing an investigation into truth, which I'm a huge proponent of. Investigate your own psychology. This is going to give you an incredible awareness, because what you'll find is that all of these shadow aspects of yourself, even if you're not aware of them right now, they're actually running your life in the background. That's sort of how they work. And the interesting thing about the shadow is that it only can exist when you don't look at it. And that's true for all fear. I'm going to make a bold claim here that you don't necessarily have to believe me, but you can verify this for yourself. All fear is an illusion. It's created by your mind, and it doesn't really exist in actual reality. And I'm not telling you to deny your fear and say, oh yeah, I'm not afraid at all. Because fear, in one sense, is very, very real. But here's what I mean. If you actually investigate the thing that you're afraid of, and you get to the core of it, you get to the root of exactly what you're afraid of, you'll realize that is a fucking lie every single time. But because you didn't examine it, because you were too afraid to even look at it, you weren't able to even bring your consciousness into it and discover the lie that you've been holding on to and believing. Some examples of shadow aspects I'll give you from my life. I've been doing a lot of shadow work over the last year or so, and these are just some things that I've discovered. That I'm not good enough, that I'm unworthy of love, that I'm unlovable, that I don't feel manly enough, that I'm that I'm a doormat, that I'm too nice to people. I feel ashamed of my body image. I feel like a hypocrite. I don't feel good enough to give self-help advice. I feel ashamed that I was molested as a kid. All of these things carry an emotional charge to them. All of these things only exist when you don't examine them. But it's scary. It's scary to actually go ahead and do that work because it feels real. While it's in the back of your mind, it feels like, oh yeah, no, that's so scary. I don't want to look at that. I just want to ignore that. And that's exactly the illusion the fear is playing on you. Because actually it's not scary once you actually get to it. Once you actually get to the core of your fear, it's hollow. There's nothing there. You can think of fear as a shadow or as a dark room. And you can think of truth or consciousness, which is just your presence, your awareness, as a light. You can think of it as a lantern. And notice what happens when you bring a lantern into a dark room. The entire room lights up. The dark can never overtake the light. Because the dark doesn't exist. The dark is just the absence of light. All it is unconsciousness. That's all evil is. That's all fear is. It's just unconsciousness. If you bring your conscious presence into that place, nothing can survive but love. And when you do this shadow work, essentially what you're doing is transmuting fear into love. Because love is the truth. And if you investigate anything deeply enough, you'll discover at the core is love. So, what are some useful tools that we can use to actually start doing this shadow work? Well, like I said, we can start from any of those 4 dimensions. So let's start with the external. This one's really interesting, and this is a powerful tool that I've been using for the last 6 or 7 months. And all it is we notice when we are judging somebody else or judging anything in the external world. And then ask yourself, how is this judgment a projection of my own self-denial? And what I've discovered is that every single time I make a judgment, it's a projection of some part of myself that I'm hating or denying, which is really mind-boggling. And at first, it may not seem like this is the case, but I encourage you to actually do this in your life. Maybe grab a piece of paper, write down 3 judgments that you've made today, or three judgments that just come to your mind, and then ask yourself, notice the thing that you're judging, and then ask yourself, do I see this in myself? Is this something I deny about myself? One of the golden examples of this is somebody judging someone for being a homosexual. Because all of that judgment, all of that hatred towards the other person is a projection of self-hatred. Because a lot of times those people grew up in a religious household who demonized homosexuality. And then, of course, because it's natural, this person has homosexual thoughts and then takes all of that hatred towards their self out on other people who are openly gay. So that's just like a prime example of projecting right there. So another helpful tool we can use, and we can use this both on the physical and the emotional level, is tuning into the emotion or a specific body part. This is really, really helpful to do to your heart. But tuning in, maybe place your hands over your heart and close your eyes and just notice the feelings and sensations that are there. And then ask yourself, what is this feeling? This is most helpful, of course, when negative emotions are already present, or maybe some tension is already present in your body. But I remember one time I went for a walk for probably 2 or 3 hours, and I literally was just focusing on specific body parts. I was focusing on all my different chakras and just allowing that part of my body to almost take over your consciousness, if you will. So it's sort of just giving this part of your body, the emotion, the tension, permission to speak its truth, if you will. You're sort of giving life to these emotions as like an individual entity so you can learn from them. But really, of course, it's just part of yourself. So this is a really, really helpful tool. And I've learned so much about myself, and I encourage you to try this one. And then on the mental level, it's all about examining your beliefs, examining your identity. So one of the best ways to do this is by becoming aware of your thoughts throughout the day, or even your words. You can start with your words if you haven't done this yet. Notice the things you say. And even if it seems random, even if it seems like it kind of came from nowhere, that's really not the case. All of our thoughts are coming from somewhere. But you have to examine, okay, where does this thought come from? You know, if you have a thought that, I'm just going to give up. It's like, okay, where does that thought come from? And maybe, every time I try something new, then I fail. I'm just a failure. You know, maybe it'll come down to some core negative belief. And then what you can do is you can actually go inside your mind and change that belief. You can, and you just do that by an honest investigation. You look into it clearly for yourself. And you start to explore, like, is this actually true? And then you can start to come up with evidence that disproves the core negative belief. And you start to look at all this evidence and you say, okay, maybe this wasn't true all along. Like, maybe I am good enough. Maybe I'm a winner. Maybe I'm not a failure. Really changing your beliefs deserves its whole video for itself. So I'll definitely do that one in the future, because that is so important. How is this applicable to awakening? So, healing and awakening, although they may seem like two different things, are really two sides of the same coin. With both, let's look at their similarities. In both cases, healing and awakening, you're shattering your old illusions and surrendering to the truth. That's essentially all we're doing with awakening. It's just leaving our minds totally open and allowing truth to essentially pervade our consciousness. And we can sort of see awakening as becoming aware of truth, but then we can see healing or shadow work as integrating this truth. Because it's really easy to have some sort of awakening or enlightenment experience, and it's amazing and blissful, and then the next day you're back to your normal state of consciousness, and you're, maybe dealing with some difficult emotions, or you're miserable. I mean, I've been there before, but healing is about integrating those experiences. It's about looking within yourself, seeing what is out of alignment here, what is not true. I encourage you to actually sit down and make sort of like a mental map of your beliefs and your identity. This will give you so much insight into the way that your mind operates. It's like you're discovering the operating system of your mind. And now you have an actual opportunity to go in and upgrade the operating system with new beliefs that are more aligned with truth. Everything is one. The internal is a reflection of the outside, because the internal is the outside. There is no separation besides the separation we create in our minds. This entire process of shadow work is about turning fear into love, or hate into love. This is all about learning to love ourselves. This is one journey of self-love. And before I forget, I do want to recommend an amazing book for shadow work and self-love called Shadows Before Dawn by Teal Swan. Self-love not only extends to our physical human self, that's important, and that's a big part of shadow work. But also remember that I mentioned the external. Because if self-love is our goal, we can't forget about the rest of ourself, which is not, because we're not just this human body. The rest of ourself is the external world. So it's about learning to love everything. And you might think, at first, why would I learn to love everything? There's so much bad in the world, so much negativity in the world. Loving is not the same thing as condoning. When I was doing shadow work about getting molested as a kid, as I was going through this process, I wrote letters expressing my emotions. And that's another thing I'll say. Expressing the denied emotions is so important for shadow work. But that's a whole nother tangent. But when I was, expressing my emotions, I eventually got to a place where I felt love for the person who molested me. And a lot of people might say, oh, well, that's not wrong, or that's not right. You should never forgive him. Forgiveness is not about condoning somebody's actions. That's not, you misunderstand forgiveness if that's what you think. Forgiveness is about letting go of the stranglehold that these thoughts and emotions have on you. It's about breaking out of this prison of fear that your mind has created. That's what forgiveness is. It's turning fear into love. And forgiveness is absolutely key for shadow work. Again, another topic that deserves its own video. I hope this was helpful for you, my friend. I hope this is a good introduction to shadow work, or even if you've studied shadow work or done shadow work, then I hope you learned something new. Consider dropping a like if you appreciate this video, and if you want to follow this journey of awakening and healing and grow with me, you can subscribe. That'd be cool. And if not, I appreciate you so much for watching either way. Thank you, my friends, and I hope you have a beautiful, beautiful day. Here's what you have to understand about this, about self-love and about loving the external world. Because we can stick to these rigid rules and boundaries about what's good and what's bad, what's acceptable, what's unacceptable. But all awakening is, and all healing is literally falling in love with life. Falling in love with yourself. Not just your human egoic self, but the larger self. Surrendering to it all of its beauty, all of its perfection. This is a journey of falling in love with life. Do you have anything better to do? We can't fall in love with life. There's money to be made. There's people to be demonized. There's bad people to punish. For what? No, I'm not saying we should legalize all crime. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that you don't have to live in a mental prison of denying parts of yourself and parts of reality when you can choose to surrender to love. Choose to surrender to what you are, the magnificence of life. Because this is a miracle, my friends. In case you haven't looked around recently, it's mind-blowing and beautiful. It's better than... It's too good to be true. But that's what reality is. It's too good to be true. And I just want you to fall in love with life. And this is really the core of my message. What's stopping you from falling in love with life? I'll tell you what it is. It's fear. Fear. And the only way to defeat fear is with love.